Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CCA living room. I'm Jason Silverman. I'm here at the CCA in the studio. It feels good to be here. It feels strange without you all joining me. And hopefully we'll get back into the theater soon and we can celebrate the art of cinema together. I am really it's a bittersweet evening tonight. I'm really excited to have two filmmakers who I deeply admire, Alex Rivera and Cristina Ibarra, here with us virtually from their home in LA. We had actually bought them plane tickets and hotel rooms to have them here in person. That was one of the great things that COVID wiped out. So we'll have fun tonight, but I miss you guys. I miss having you in person. It's always amazing to have you here in New Mexico with us. Before we start talking about the Infiltrators and welcome Alex and Cristina, I just want to talk about some of the upcoming programs because there are some completely fantastic ones. Next Tuesday, a film called Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, with the director Eliza Hittman, interviewed by Mara Fortes, who's a great friend of CCA's. This film is one of the most powerful you're going to see all year. Not to put it into the awards category, but you'll be hearing about it when awards season comes. It is just riveting, an incredible piece of work that is being co-presented by CCA and the National Organization for Women. That's next Tuesday. On Friday, we are going to be honoring the ACLU, which is celebrating its 100th birthday this year. 100th or 75th, a big birthday this year, with a screening of the film The Fight and a panel discussion featuring folks from the National ACLU and Peter Simonson, who's the head of the ACLU in New Mexico. The following Tuesday, one of the most impressive filmmakers on the face of the planet, Zach Koenig, who many of you might remember from the film Fast Runner. He basically invented an indigenous cinema in the Inuit region of Canada. We're going to show One Day in the Life of Noah Piagotic, which is an incredibly rich film. And he'll be in conversation. That's in collaboration with Swaya as part of Indian Market. The following Tuesday, we're going to be showing Dead Man, the Jim Jarmusch classic, and talking to Gary Farmer, one of the stars of the film. So we have a great lineup. There's other things on our website. Join us for lots of living room programs. But one of the great ones is tonight with Alex and Cristina. You guys can turn on your cameras and wave while I praise you. Hey, guys. Christina's work, she's been making documentary films that explore the U.S.-Mexico border for 17 plus years. Las Marthas was nationally broadcast. And we're going to actually show a little bit of Las Conquistador, which we weren't initially planning to doing, but it's so relevant to what's going on in Santa Fe that we have to do it. Cristina, thank you for being with us. And Alex Rivera, who many of you will remember from his multiple visits here, has been making first experimental works about the border and about immigration, and then made a wonderful feature film called Sleep Dealer. He's made documentaries, he's made music videos, he's done everything. He's one of my heroes. And these two are the co-directors of The Infiltrators. So welcome, guys.
Hi.
Thanks so much. We're getting a little note that our internet connection is slow, so it's shut off the camera, but we're here and we're happy to be here.
That means everyone has to look at me for the next 60 minutes.
Okay.
Everyone's going to want their money back. Everyone's rushing for the exits.
Hopefully, I don't know. Yeah, we'll see what happens, but it seems like it's out of our control.
Okay. Well, what we'll do is I just wanted to, before we talk about Infiltrators, which we could probably talk about for 18 hours, I'm just going to take a little bit of the time to talk, to talk about Las Conquistador and some of your early work, Alex. Amra, if we could play that clip from Las Conquistador, I just wanted to share it with everybody so they know it's out there, because it's a conversation. The bit we're going to show is a conversation that could be happening in Santa Fe City Hall right now. So we're going to watch just a little clip, and then we'll see you guys after.
We wanted the city of El Paso to understand that every decent human being who has a boundary says, okay, I mean, this has gone too far. Invaders whose legacy is violence and terror that we oppose. It is to the City Council of El Paso, Texas, that we direct this statement.
Opponents of a statue honoring Spanish conquistador Don Juan de Oñate are literally putting their foot down. Acoma artist Myris Chino now plan to give the city a gift of sorts.
It was brutal and it was violent.
Their anti-Oñate efforts.
Controversial statue.
El Paso City Council. More controversy.
Conquistador Don Juan de Oñate.
If some of those things that we read were true, then it was definitely something that the city council had to know about.
Honoring this conquistador will bring shame to this city. We will see to that.
I think the goal is ultimately to destroy the project, but that's not going to happen.
Item number 6 is discussion and action for a permanent stay on any public funding for the Juan de Oñate Monument or under the jurisdiction of the City of El Paso. What I would like to remind the council of is many of my demographic family people, Hispanic females, professional women, mothers, daughters, that have an interest in seeing something that is tangible, positive, and substantial in El Paso, and to leave it as a legacy to all of the citizens of the Southwest, I think is very important.
Our city here is thinking about putting up a statue of an individual that massacred or tried to wipe us off the face of this earth. I pray to my grandfathers up in the heavens that you have a heart here, the way your mothers and your fathers and your grandfathers raised you to be good. You're going to tell your grandchildren, I remember 9/11. Well, we remember Juan de Oñate. Send them back to hell.
History's got its good and its bad points, but this is
it's so powerful, and it's this was 8 years ago that you made this film, Cristina?
No, this actually was broadcast in 2008.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, you're taking me back to a time where I at that moment didn't realize how we would be dealing with these monuments being toppled all over the country today. Back then, we didn't have the Black Lives Matter movement and this whole energy right now after this tragic death of George Floyd that is just it's just creating change all over. It's very exciting to see. Back then, we didn't have that kind of energy.
Have you revisited any of this issue since over the last few months, since the monuments have been kind of falling throughout the country?
Somewhat, yeah. I've been trying to keep up a little bit with what's happening in New Mexico, and the monument that this particular film follows is in El Paso, Texas, my hometown, and it's large. It's not gonna it's not gonna come down through throwing red paint at it. It's going to take a huge effort. That it will be legislative and political, and with many activists coming together. But yeah, I'm inspired by what's happening, all over New Mexico.
So it's a good lead in. Alex, I've been following your work almost since the beginning, and you've made all of these ingenious works about the border. Of course, all of these themes are kind of present with us in a major way right now, in a way that they weren't when you guys started exploring border issues early on. Can you maybe talk about why you each have spent so many years in your careers dedicated to these issues?
Sure. So, I mean, for me, I think like a lot of filmmakers and artists, you start close to home. And so when I was in college and had to make a thesis film, I started real close to home, discussing the life of my dad, and my father's an immigrant from Peru, and is kind of through his life and that side of my family, a kind of a way in, some skin in the game to think about immigration and the border kind of broadly conceived, not the border as a line in the sand, but the border as a mental space, as a space of political conversation, and that when I started to engage, it was the mid 1990s, which, even though in the age of Trump we feel like we're at like fever pitch, like it could. And maybe it is. We don't know if we're at maximum border right now, but the mid 1990s was pretty maximum border. That was when the border wall went up under President Clinton. Operation Gatekeeper in California, Prop 187, was kind of rocking the state and the nation. So there was, Guillermo Gomez Peña, Lourdes Portillo. There was a flourishing of border arts and hate, border hate, and all of it was kind of pretty maximum in the 90s. So that was when I started to engage, and and it's been a really sort of productive terrain to just sit your mind in and to think about. It's a universe of possibility,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and growing up along the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, to me it was about questions of representation. When I would see images on television about the border, whether they were coming from the Mexican airwaves or the American U.S. airwaves, they were always about a place I didn't understand, I didn't see, even though I lived there and I grew up there. And so for me, I was really interested in changing the narrative about what we think about the border narrative. What is that? And inspired by people like Gloria Anzaldúa, who talks about the border, as this scar, and that's constantly rebuilding itself. But I guess in my attempts at looking at the border, I do carry that legacy that of this theorist, but I also want to see the playful side, or maybe the side that's spectacular, performative, and that's really what led me to think about this film with Alex.
Yeah, it's a great segue. I mean, the question becomes, who gets to tell stories about this place and this moment and this concept and this idea? And can you talk a little bit about what Americans don't see in terms of stories about the border?
So yeah, I mean, normally what we don't see is we don't see people who are falling in love and having a regular day, just families who fight with their parents. And I mean, this is what we're seeing is the tragedy. And I'm not saying it's not there, because it definitely is. We see it play out often, every day. But alongside that, you also have resistance. You have strategies of survival. You have sophisticated political thinkers and people who want to push back.
Yeah, and through Cristina, I've been spending time in El Paso, and yeah, so like she says, like the border as not a place of even far from a place of like people jumping over the wall and a place of like criminal invasion, but the border as a place of life, permanence, a place with history. That's something I've perceived through spending time in this extended family of mine. Cristina and I we're a family. And so seeing El Paso through the lens of people who've been there forever. So the border not as a place of transition or contact, but as a place of permanence. That's a lens we never see really reflected. But then I think everything else she said, that we have limited time, so I don't want to repeat it, but I agree with it.
Okay, beautiful, thank you. So on to the Infiltrators. I've been hearing about this film for a long time, and when I first heard about it, I believe you guys were making a pretty straightforward short film.
Sounds right. That's how it started.
Can you talk about how it evolved from? And I think, and I'm going through the memory banks, Alex, but I believe there was an activist who inspired you, and you wanted to make a profile of an activist. and years ago. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess one step back from that is that, involved in these the story of immigration and the story of watching the sort of border become this kind of militarized zone and the enforcement apparatus ramping up over these 25 years that we've been kind of thinking about this place and thinking about these lives and watching that whole system, the deportation system, expand, ramp up. Presidents come and go, but the deportations go up and up and up. Watching that, there's a question, which was like, who's ever going to tap the brakes? Who can stand up to stop this? And thinking historically about the various violences that America's had ingrained in its being and that have been confronted, the violence of slavery and Jim Crow, the violence of segregation, the violence of women being pushed out of basic participation, political participation, etc. So those different violences, who pushes back is the person who's under attack. You need the civil rights movement has to be led by black folks. Women's liberation has to be led by women. So there was always this thought about watching this system of attack being built up against immigrants. How could immigrants fight back? And what's the space of political possibility for a group that is very vulnerable because they don't have citizenship? So they stand up to fight back. They can be removed from the playing field. How could that conundrum be worked out? How can stateless people build political power? And so it was like a question I think, we had, and when we saw this group in 2010 start to take shape, a group of radical dreamers, undocumented youth, undocumented immigrants, standing up, getting arrested, facing an administration that was conducting absolutely record deportations, but coming out and getting arrested and throwing themselves at the system. It seemed very exciting, disturbing, and necessary to make a film. And I thought to myself, we'll make a quick film about one of these actions, explore some of these questions in short form. I'll be in and out in 3 weeks. And it ended up taking instead closer to 7 years.
Why was that?
Why was that? Well, because the group, when it went to edit that short film, they went and did something else. The group was called sometimes Dream Activists, sometimes the National Immigrant Youth Alliance. They had different names. But as they kept kind of, once, like I said, when I was editing version 1, they went and did something far more powerful. And so it was like, we'll have to film that and edit that and then try to edit that. They went and did something again. So ultimately sort of stopped editing and just kept kind of filming with them. And Cristina saw some of the work. We started to work together and spent ultimately about 2 years filming the growth of this group. And then after it was done, we realized that this one chapter in their growth, when they had already been stopping deportations for about 2 years, and they started to figure out, if we know how to stop our own deportations, maybe we should scale this up and go into a detention center and see if this toolbox we've developed works in there. So go into a detention center to get people out. And that was the story that we had kind of filmed along the way, and it seemed incredible. And then that became the core of this feature film.
So we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to show a clip from your making of documentary, because it might not have occurred to the viewers. I mean, even I learned a lot about documentary form, and I've been studying it for all this time. It's so adventurous what you guys did formally. I mean, it's such an incredible experiment in storytelling, what you created. And so the clip we're going to watch is going to describe that on a creative level. Cristina, maybe you could tell us a little bit why it was necessary to make the film this way.
So once we decided to settle on the events that took place at the Broward Transitional Center, it became very clear that we had only part of the footage that we needed to tell the story. Once the infiltrators are successfully detained and go inside, we lose them from the camera lens. And really, there were questions about how we could follow the story, but maybe we could have changed the story to follow, not changed the story, but followed a different story. But we were really dedicated to highlight what happened here, to expose what happened here. And we just turned to actors based on seeing some of the observations that we had with one of our protagonists getting ready for her infiltration. We really quickly realized that they're performers. That's what they do. So that led us to think about actors on our end as well, just kind of like trying to be inspired by them, taking their lead in some ways. And so we ended up having to settle on a hybrid form with script and for the what happens inside the detention center mostly, and our documentary camera for the outside.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to watch a clip about that, and it's so I just have to say it's so interesting. I mean, watching this, I understood how elaborate and intricate your process is, and I just want to say in advance of the clip, congratulations, because it really is an incredible achievement what you guys pulled off. Okay, so Amra, if we could watch that clip now, that would be great.
Well, I'm Alex Rivera, one of the directors and producers of The Infiltrators.
I'm Cristina Ibarra.
The Infiltrators.
I'm Cristina Ibarra. The story of the infiltration that stood out.
Back in 2010, there were about 40,000 immigrants locked up inside. Despite the scale of the system, very few images of the insides of these facilities.
I can almost compare it to a theater play. Mo being the director, Marco and I being actors.
We decided to depict the unseeable realm of detention with actors, and we entered the landscape of the hybrid film.
A bit about hybrid films. In this case, by hybrid, we mean films that tell a true story, but that use scripted reenactments with actors to tell parts of that story.
A lot of hybrid films use an interview as the main documentary element.
And then use reenactments.
Dreamers were being deported by the
Obama.
The whole film ends up feeling a bit like a flashback.
We wanted to do something different, something that felt urgent, immediate.
And we had more than an interview on the documentary side. We had footage of real people in real time fighting a ticking clock. We started to think maybe the hybrid form would feel more urgent if the reenactments took place in simultaneous story time, rather than always in the past.
But can you please try and find out what time his flight is?
Okay, I'll try.
And call me back right away. I'll do it. Because what he told his wife...
In our case, the reenactments were resolving a problem of space.
Over them.
Hey, Jason, something's not right here.
We wanted the narrative clock to keep moving forward.
We needed to edit our documentary footage first to define the story, to identify the parts that needed reenactment, to then write those scripts, to then shoot that material, and then weave it back into the already existing narrative.
This is the process we came up with. First, we build an enhanced radio edit, meaning working with our friend and one of the editors of The Infiltrators, the filmmaker Aldo Velasco. We assembled a version of the whole story using interview material.
Rápido. Y se bajaron oficiales con arma armado y me empezaron a apuntar con las armas.
Then we identified which scenes we'd want to recreate. I like to draw, and so for those scenes, I made drawings, super rough storyboards, and we cut those in and used our voices to give them a bit of life.
We built a full 90-minute rough cut like this, and for the first time, we were able to get a sense of how the cross-cutting between documentary and recreation in simultaneous story time might work.
Broward Transitional Center.
Mohammed?
Hey, Marco. Oh, ya estamos hablando ahorita con Marco.
Mo?
What happened?
They're deporting Cesar. His flight is tonight.
Yeah, I know. He just called his wife.
We got excited that somehow, bizarrely, it flowed, even with the rough drawings. We worked for about a year in this form. We realized along the way we had left the ranch.
The film was becoming something very different than a documentary, and it raised questions for us. For example, the real infiltrators thought we were making a documentary.
But now we were writing words that their characters would say. We realized one way or another we were now in a world of writing. My name is Marco. I'm with the National Immigrant Youth Alliance. Your son reached out to us. Sort of like writing a biopic. And so we decided to do something documentaries
Hello?
If that was off, or maybe someone in the audience can let us know if that looked okay. It looked okay from our end, but there might be some audio issues.
It looked okay. Like, was the voiceover about the hybrid film, or was the voiceover?
Yeah, I don't know. It looked like it. I think it looked like it, right? If anyone in the audience wants to chat to us and let us know if that looked like it was correct, we can. We'll talk for a second while we sort that out. But
in any case, what I saw was there's a chunk of the making of, which is the piece of it about the hybrid film and the hybrid film's traditional use of recreations to tell the past. So I saw that visual, but then I heard audio from the very beginning of the making of, where we're talking about why we made the film, and
we got that for a second. Yeah. Anyway, we can talk about the making of. It looked okay. So we're getting a note that it says it looked okay. And Rutgers, do you want to hop back in? Should we hop back into it? Because I think we were getting it, and I do love that clip. Do you guys mind if we hop back into it?
That sounds great.
Sure.
Okay. Yes. Sorry, everybody. We're in a new era here.
Yeah.
Well,
call me back right away.
I'm Alex Rivera, one of the directors and producers of The Infiltrators.
I'm Cristina Ibarra.
I'm going to forward it.
Well, I'm Alex Rivera.
A bit about hybrid films, in this case by creation.
We
were able to get a sense of how the cross cut forward.
We need already existing narrative.
This is the process we came up with. First, we built an enhanced radio edit, meaning working with our friend and one of the
editors of The Infiltrators, the filmmaker Aldo Velasco. We assembled a version of the whole story using interview material.
Rápido. Y se bajaron oficiales con arma armado y me empezaron a apuntar con las armas.
Then we identified which scenes we'd want to recreate. I like to draw, and so for those scenes, I made drawings, super rough storyboards, and we cut those in and used our voices to give them a bit of life.
We built a full 90-minute rough cut like this, and for the first time, we were able to get a sense of how the cross-cutting between documentary and recreation in simultaneous story time might work.
Broward Transitional Center.
Mohammed?
Hey, Marco. Oh, ya estamos hablando ahorita con Marco.
Mo?
What happened?
They're deporting Cesar. His flight is tonight.
Yeah, I know. He just called his wife.
We got excited that somehow, bizarrely, it flowed, even with the rough drawings. We worked for about a year in this form. We realized along the way we had left the ranch.
The film was becoming something very different than a documentary, and it raised questions for us. For example, the real infiltrators thought we were making a documentary.
But now we were writing words that their characters would say. We realized one way or another we were now in a world of writing. My name is Marco. I'm with the National Immigrant Youth Alliance. Your son reached out to us. Sort of like writing a biopic. And so we decided to do something documentaries almost never do, but that people writing biopics do all the time. We decided to show the real people our work.
We had a meeting in New York. Marco, Mo, Viri, Claudio, they all came, and we screened our rough cut with drawings. They got to see how we were depicting them and how we were interpreting scenes that they lived.
Tienes como una hora o 2 horas para preparar todas sus cosas.
We did 2 days of workshops with the group, in which their feedback and knowledge enriched our understanding of the story and impacted the script.
Finally, we temporarily locked the cut and worked again with Aldo to turn the stick figure storyboards into a screenplay. After all that work, we had half of a film and half of a screenplay.
We finally got the cast and crew together to shoot the recreations in summer of 2018. We shot for 15 days.
Worked for the audience. We had some problems in the presentation room, but so yeah, it's an incredible process to envision that. Can we talk maybe you can talk a little bit about frustrations you might have and challenges you might have had along the way as you're kind of envisioning it, number one. And number two, how the content of this, and Cristina, you mentioned this a little bit, how the content and the intention of the film resonated with the form you ended up discovering.
Sure. So, I mean, what can I say? The creative process was both like kind of wonderful in terms of like we had this challenge of having half of a film made and then having to just imagine what was that other half. And we definitely considered walking away from the project, but once you say we're going to do it, then it's like it says in the thing, like thinking about animation, storyboards, like we thought about like Lars Van Trier's film, Dogville, which is like, you know, actors in a kind of black box. So the idea that people might walk out of the documentary and walk into this kind of netherworld, the very abstract performance. We thought about that. So that part about brainstorming all of it was that was like sort of, I'd say creatively fun, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the visual exploration, for sure. Then there was this other question about like the content, right? So then what we ended up with were these documents, these internal government documents that we received through a Freedom of Information Act request. And they, because when we sat down to do the sit-down interviews and with the infiltrators and some of the detainees who were inside during the infiltration, it sometimes sounded so much like a Hollywood film. Like
the events they were recounting seemed impossibly.
It was, yeah. The you know, the way people rose up and, you know, the threats, and I mean, it was dramatic. It was very dramatic. And so, but we got corroboration through these documents, these government documents. And so, you know, even though it's in script form, we're, you know, it's a true story.
Yeah, trying to give it a journalistic spine and yeah.
So, I mean, there were those questions, and then it became a little tricky because then we're having to have the actors speak for real people. And so there are all these like thorny questions that we had to work out with our protagonists to make sure that they understood what we were trying to do, or as we discovered what we were trying to do.
And then there was like we did a lot of pitching of the film, you know, to raise the money. And so like one of the really decisive events was the pitch forum at Hot Docs. You know, for people who've not been, the Hot Docs, you know, they have this market where all these filmmakers come. Let's say it's a dozen filmmakers for argument's sake. And then they bring maybe 20 commissioning editors and funders from around the world to hear the 12 pitches. But they do it in this kind of like theater in the round thing where you sit at a table with the funders and you pitch, and there's several hundred people watching in this kind of Harry Potter-esque sort of hall. And it's all lit up and it's very high stakes. And we did that. And there's a lot of questions because of the hybrid thing. And I think once you enter the land of hybridity and scripting, funders and other people who are accustomed to normal documentary practice have questions. And they started to really question basically like the ethics of the film. And is this a film that we're making to support the activists? Are we part of them? Are we, you know, and those kinds of questions emerged, and that was like frustrating and complicated to navigate because it often feels like, you know, not all documentarians get asked those kinds of questions, but we felt like we were in this landscape of recreation out of necessity. There's no way to make a detention center film without the permission of ICE. There's a series on Netflix that premiered this week, Immigration Nation. And there's been controversy about ICE and the filmmakers, but the simple truth is they got the permission of ICE. That's how they got in there. They were embedded with ICE, and we
were embedded as
well. We
were
embedded with the other side, and we tried to get into the detention center. They would never. The Geo Group wouldn't talk to us. ICE wouldn't talk to us. So if you're going to make an oppositional film to look at the detention system, how are you going to depict it if you're not allowed in? We felt like the only answer was something creative, you know, and so we had to kind of.
It was risky.
Yeah, we had to leave the documentary ranch, you know.
There's a way in which the story is will be unbelievable to Americans that there is a prison on American soil that is holding people without any due process. It's just people will not believe that part, and so when you enter into the realm of any kind fiction, it's dangerous, right? So you had that to contend with too, I imagine. I found that when the first time I saw the film, my jaw was open for 90 minutes.
Thanks. Well, thank you. I mean, we hope that the thing feels kind of like a blimp tied down to the ground, where like the documentary sort of elements, which are constantly popping in and out, sort of tether it down to a sense of veracity or reality for the audience, while the fiction kind of lets it float off into this realm of like depicting what you can't see, and also giving it a sort of genre pulse or something that might help invite an audience into enjoying this story somehow. But finding that rhythm between the doc and the fiction, the doc and the recreation, was really the trick of it all.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm struggling with the fiction because it's like it is the way that we handled that was just we did have to composite some characters, but I mean, we tried to stay as true to what we learned, and not every film has that objective.
Yeah, and anytime you turn on the camera, it's a very specific version of that reality.
That's true.
So I want to invite our audience to send in questions. I know we're about to take a turn towards the political here because there's so much to talk about on that front, particularly right now. We have a question from Maria Cristina Lopez. What did the real people, the subjects of the film, think of the actors playing them in the final story? Did it seem true to them? Did they have doubts? How did they respond when they saw the film finally?
Yeah, so what we had this insane task of hiring like 24 speaking parts in 2 weeks, and I'm grateful for the protagonists we found, the lead actors we found to play our protagonists. They are so talented. What they did is they studied some of the documentary material that we disclosed to them so they could prepare for the role, and we connected them with their counterparts. So we had phone calls with Chelsea Rendon and Vidi, and with Marco and Maynor, and we were lucky enough that Claudio was able to accept our invitation to come to set. And so out of all of them, I think that that actor had the most difficult time. Probably he did an amazing job, but he was under a challenging situation, having the real person he was depicting watching him depict him. So that was very postmodern, perhaps.
How did you find someone who looks so much like Willem Dafoe?
Right.
Cloning. Yeah.
Yeah, a great Willem. Willem Dafoe is going to get some sort of award for that. And sorry. Anyway,
it's the immigrant, the Latino version of being John Malkovich.
So yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, but then they ended up after the film was completed. We did present the film at Sundance with some of the folks who are protagonists. Like Vidi was there, Mo was there, and they were at all the screenings and went up to the Q&A and were able to speak about their experience. It was really wild when the film, for me personally, when the film ended, and then to see them go up on stage. It was a very fulfilling feeling.
But it says, I think in the making of, it talks about this workshop where we kind of broke through the fourth wall or whatever, where we showed the doc with the storyboards in it to Marco, Mo, Vidi, and Claudio, so they could see that we were writing a script featuring them and kind of filling in the blanks and letting them respond to it and enrich it with their knowledge and kind of and so at that moment kind of making it more of a collaborative practice than the normal documentary thing, right. Which I think is fairly critiqued as extractive. I think documentary is always extractive, and there's sort of no way to get away from that in terms of that, unless it's autobiographical, but there's always this element of going into somebody's life, taking something out. There's an unequal power relationship that haunts that no matter what. But I think that probably the biggest thing you can do to transcend that is to show the work in progress to the subjects. Sometimes that's not appropriate, but in this case, because we were scripting, it felt like really necessary. And so that was like, I think, a really key thing. And it was a dangerous decision for us, because we felt like if we showed it and they're like, yo, this is not what I wanted you to do at all, we didn't sign up for this, we were pretty far in at that point, obviously, and we would have had to figure out a way to make dramatic changes.
How did you feel? How did you guys feel? Do you have knots in your stomach with those days? What do those days feel like when you were showing that footage?
We wanted it to be the most comfortable possible, and but at the same time we wanted it to look as professional as possible. So we went to a theater. One of our partners, Tribeca, God, I wish they were still around, but they helped us find a theater, and it was pretty nerve-wracking, to be honest. Like, I mean, I've never done that before in any of my previous works, and so this was something you're told not to do, and it was just, yeah.
But again, yeah. So, anyways, long story short, that in terms of this question about how did they react, it was really great that they didn't see it for the first time at Sundance. They had already seen basically a draft, and so that was, and they had participated in its shaping in a pretty proactive way, and so that was the best thing I think we could have done. I
want to go deeper into this rabbit hole, but I know we should probably shift into talking about, because you guys are here and you've been documenting what's going on politically for all of these years, and it just seems a unique opportunity to kind of get a perspective on what's happening now too. And what occurred to me watching this film the first time when I saw it, it was almost 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. It was completely shocking and horrifying to me that these detention centers existed without any due process. It just seems like a human rights violation. It's, just kind of throws rule of law out the window. But I didn't know about how powerful. Is it in the film that says ICE is the biggest police force in the history of the universe? And of course, now the film almost feels quaint in terms of the human rights violations have been turned up to such a high degree now that you could almost look back and wish for the days when these were the human rights abuses, the days of those detention, the Obama era detention centers. Mm-hmm. I watched Immigration Nation too, and it just, my heart is going to be broken for a few weeks. So can you talk a little bit about the long arc of immigration policy in this country and how this film relates to it and where we are now?
I would like Alex to take the lead on that, but just to respond really quickly to this, the level of violence that we see in the film versus what we're now exposed to today with the mainstream images. I just feel like we were at what they called a model detention center, and so these were the stories that we were exposed to, but even back then, we also knew about a pretty deep level of abuse that was happening, and it was just like it was really difficult to try to figure out how much would be believable even to depict. But about today,
yeah. No, in terms of the long sweep of things, I mean, it's where to begin and how to think about this. I mean, to me, the original sin of immigrant detention really started in the late 1800s, in the 1880s, after the first immigration law was passed, which a lot of folks maybe don't know, or maybe some do, but it was Chinese exclusion was the very first law governing migration, no Chinese. And there was a set of Chinese immigrants who refused to comply and created a set of test cases that went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
And one of them is a New York laundryman named Fong Yue Ting, was the first immigrant to be targeted for deportation, and he contested it as being unconstitutional, saying that the founding fathers did not put deportation in the Constitution. They did not put banishment in the Constitution. And they put a lot of things in the Constitution, like not depriving anyone of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, of which he felt like he was doing, building a business and a family in New York. And so
an intentional omission.
Yeah, and so he launched this kind of conservative constitutionalist defense against deportation at all in the 1880s, and he almost won. He got 3 votes in the Supreme Court saying there should be no such thing as deportation at all, but there were six against him, and so deportation began. And detention is this kind of liminal land where people are being held in case they'll be deported. And since they're not found, it's not a crime, they're not sentenced, it's all the stuff that's in the film. This thing, it's like a cancer that started back then and has metastasized over these decades and century. And here we are, kids in cages, kids told to represent themselves in court, tens of thousands of people locked up in cells, but because they're not being punished legally because they haven't committed a crime, they don't get a court-appointed lawyer, they don't get a trial by their peers. It's like this whole other weird purgatory hellscape that has become normalized and systematized in our society, and I think needs to be destroyed, needs to be undone the way it was done. So anyways, it's like here we are, but obviously under Obama, deportations were actually higher than under Trump. There was more deportations under him, but there's more people in detention under Trump. We could talk about other contours and differences between these administrations, but the problem is deep and goes back to these early decisions about how this country wants to control who's in and who's out, and what kinds of suffering it's willing to put people through for what's kind of a logistical question,
What I find interesting is that we're talking about Black Lives Matters, we're talking about original sin in the same way. I haven't heard immigration discussed in that way, that it's actually deeply embedded in the kind of American character in a way that we don't even we don't see it because we don't see it.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. I mean, there's notions of, it's just the notions of insider and outsider, and I think the right wing has become so effective. I mean, some of the most effective metaphors are like ones that Trump has used, like, you lock the doors on your house, wouldn't you want to lock the doors on the country? And in a sense, you're like, yeah, I do lock my doors at night. Hey, wait a second, you're right. Wait, but actually, a nation is not a house. It's not my house. It's like a space that we all build together, and actually it's very permeable. Anyways, but the metaphors that the right wing has developed are really, really effective. And I think the left or pro-immigrant forces have not created as effective, simple metaphors to describe an alternative, But when you look at the deep history, it's pretty clear where things sort of started to skid off the tracks. If you read those Supreme Court dissents from the 1880s, the Supreme Court justices who said there should be no deportation, they said this is going to grow a very strange system that's going to be an affront to our values. If you're going to start locking people up, chaining them up, putting them on boats to send them thousands of miles away against their will, away from their businesses and their families, that system is not going to look like what America should look like. And they were saying it in the 1880s.
Just after a system in which we were chaining people up and putting them on boats to bring here.
That irony has dawned on me before, and I think would be a great, we talk about that another time, but it's very deep. It's pretty deep.
So I'm gonna, because I want to shift into heroism before we leave this conversation, I would like to play another clip. There's a lot of clips about, this is a great celebration of courage, this film, and I really appreciate that. this clip isn't the world's greatest representation of that, but I'm going to show it anyway, so we can enter back into the film and we can talk about the actual subject of the film a little bit. So here we go.
آمریکا مثل خونه منه ولی نمیفهمم برای چی میخوان منو یه جایی بفرستن که اصلا آشنا نیستم باهاش.
If you were deported, where would you be deported to?
If I was deported, I'd be deported to Iran. And because I'm gay, that's probably not the best place to go.
Please support the youth, support education, pass the DREAM Act.
The federal bill would give undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children a pathway to permanent citizenship.
One day my mom just learned about the DREAM Act, and what she told me was, don't ever search for it because the government will find us somehow. And so the first thing I did is I Googled the DREAM Act. From there, I sort of got connected with other undocumented youth. Essentially what we're going to do from now is, the training is still going to happen. It's going to start as soon as we kick everybody else out. We're just going to do the legal part for the folks that are doing the action, so we'll talk about that. We're here to ask Senator McCain to co-sponsor the DREAM Act. So we're here to ask him to co-sponsor the bill right now.
5 protesters, all reportedly illegal immigrants, are refusing to leave.
Marking one of the first known instances activists have risked deportation. Not guilty. The one thing that every undocumented kid is told is, if you see a police officer, run and hide because you could get turned over to immigration. What we learned is that to actually have power as an immigrant, you have to do the exact opposite.
Whenever we got arrested publicly, ICE was nowhere to be found.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
So once we sort of had the safety of knowing that we could not be deported, we sort of had infinite possibilities.
Maybe you could just talk a little bit about getting to know Mohammed and Marco and Viridiana and the others. It gives hope for the future, doesn't it? Maybe you can talk a bit, tell some stories about the time you spent with them.
So, they are. I just love them so much. They're so inspiring. Let's see, how can I say? Like Marco is somebody who I hope it's okay to say this, I guess, but they used to call him Marco X because he's somebody who is so academic and thoughtful, and that he's always quoting a lot of civil rights leaders. And he's very, his brain is so beautiful and charming.
They called him Marco X so much that they changed it to Marcox. And then that's like the inside joke. It's like Marco X, Marcox. You show up there and say, this guy Marcox? What? It will rewind. It's Marco X, like Malcolm X. And so that was one thing for me that was like super surprising, is I'd seen them in the news and I thought, they're risking their lives, doing the civil disobedience, getting arrested, confronting their own deportation, this sort of life and death specter, and showed up and it's laughter, tons of laughter actually. And the group was like very wickedly smart and full of that youthful joy inside this activist space. And also obviously really brilliant strategy, Mohammed kind of leading a lot of the strategy along with many other mostly women leaders in that leadership tier, but just like sort of this mix of like high level strategic thinking, life and death stakes, and then a lot of like just laughter and to get through it all,
Yeah, that sums it up.
more story. It's these moments that we're seeing on TV of protest. They're led by teenagers, by young 20-somethings. It's really inspiring. In these, Viridiana, she was valedictorian of her class. I mean, and these stories are just incredible. These the other side of the flip side of this coin is that there are challenges that the society is facing, and that are people who are brave enough to confront them. And I found I chills down my spine watching the film in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, no, VD is unstoppable. I mean, you really, you have to really be ready to hear what she has to say, and even if you don't like it, like she'll tell you.
Yeah.
And they're just, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was an interesting political moment under Obama, because again, he was sitting on this machine that was deporting record numbers, and yet he was saying really poetic things about the immigrant community as part of his rhetoric. And so they were able to really sort of find those wires to create a short circuit. And by jumping in front of news cameras and saying, I'm undocumented, I'm one of these people that he's deporting, look at me right here, and look at my mom, look at my family, hear my story, create this kind of weird hijacking of the politics to force him to deport, like say, are you going to deport me? I'm on TV now. Deport me in front of everybody, not in the shadows, not, do it in front of, and he didn't. And when he didn't, he blinked. And so then the group was able to kind of accelerate and keep doing bigger and bigger actions and kind of crack open this space of the possible. And under Trump, that's been one of the sort of real casualties, is he's like, oh, you're in front of the TV cameras? We're definitely deporting you. That's throwing red meat to his base. And so that space that this group had kind of stretched out and created has taken sort of a different shape under Trump. At least is what I've seen,
Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, it's Claudio who was threatened with deportation?
Yeah. So what happened with Claudio is that after the film received awards at Sundance, and it was in the press, his name was in the press as well as somebody who was speaking out against detention centers. And Claudio had been going to his regular check-ins for 7 years, after he was released from Broward. So he went in for his regular check-in a week before the Miami premiere, and didn't come back out. He was detained for a month. And it's been a year now since his deportation. He's, now in Argentina and is trying to get back. And we're looking for ways to use the film to help bring him home.
And he was targeted. It's clear.
We believe it is, but we're still, he has a legal team that is working on making that connection. Yeah.
Yeah, and when this happened, when he was detained, and then and we had a campaign. The IDA published a letter in support. The International Documentary Association, Sundance, the letter that the Documentary Association published was signed by Ava DuVernay, John Leguizamo, 700 members of the film community. Mohammed and Vidi and other activists activated and got a private bill, which is like a piece of legislation, introduced into Congress to give Claudio status. Under Obama, that would have stopped the deportation right there. Under Trump, it did not. But there was a pretty massive campaign to try to get him out of detention when he was detained. And it failed, and he was deported. Along the way, we learned that under Trump, there's this pattern of, it's sort of the opposite of Obama, whereas under Obama, like I was mentioning, public activists would get discretion. They'd sort of tap the brakes. Under Trump, public activists have been the target of enhanced enforcement. And so there's an attorney at NYU, Alina Das, who's been representing a set of immigrants who were targeted for speaking out, and she's been winning. First time in American history, any immigrants have been, their deportations have been stopped on the basis of the First Amendment. And that's what she's been doing in federal court, is really interesting legal work. She's representing Claudio. He has a hearing in federal court in September. And then separately, we're trying to lay a legal foundation to bring him back, hopefully under a Biden administration. We were just involved in lobbying the Democratic National Committee. They're shaping their platform right now. And our group that we're working with put language into the platform to protect immigrants' rights to freedom of speech and to establish a process for immigrants who are the victims of unconstitutional retaliation for them to come home. So that language, when the democratic platform is issued, will be in there, thanks to the efforts of the activists around our film. And we hope with another administration, there's a shot to bring him home. That's
a small goal, hopefully, with the new administration. Hopefully there's some sort of sense, I mean, like you said, there could be fundamental change, but maybe at least some sensible, larger change.
Yeah.
Good. Oh, sorry, go ahead. We can come back to that, but that's probably a good thing to close with is hopes for the future. Before we go there, Renee Walters asked if you have remained in contact with the subjects of the film, and if you could give us an update. She asked if any of them have received DACA status, or maybe you can let us know how the people we met in the film are doing now.
So so Claudio just recorded a message for us to share with Biden. So we are in contact with him. He's, we're working with him to bring him home. We have Marco, who is he's working with his family in the South Bronx. Do you know the status of his case?
He has an asylum application, but we don't. It's a sort of long story, but in a nutshell, because of a different activist action, he ended up having to seek asylum rather than DACA. So he has an asylum application.
Yeah. So we're waiting to hear from what's going on with that. And then Vidi is working in North Carolina. She has an organization called Alerta Migratoria, and is happy to hear from you. You can reach out to her directly. She's still working, as well as Mohammed is still working, but not sure. He's hard to pin down, but he's out there doing something.
So 2 questions for us to kind of close with. One is, are there, the way you described immigration policy in this country, Alex, makes me think we're not going to get to the bottom of it anytime soon. But are there ways in which what would a sensible an immigration policy look like under a new administration? Biden doesn't have the world's greatest track record in terms of this. In terms of this, what could we wish for? What could we work towards in the years to come? That would be ambitious, but possible.
Yeah, I think it's the Migrant Justice Platform. Let me take a look. I think that's what it's.
You could put it into chat. If you want to put it into chat, you could.
Yeah, I'll do that. So, I mean, there's definitely people smarter than me who've thought through what sensible policy should be. To me, I'm mostly interested in like the existential issues, the deep questions about, what's at the moral core of all this? Like, and to me, I just personally would not feel comfortable telling somebody born somewhere, you have to stay put. Like me, like I'm not going to tell you because you were born in, wherever, El Salvador, born in Australia, or born wherever, you got to stay there. You stay there. Like, I would never do that to somebody. Like, if someone wants to travel to study or to work or to eat or to visit their, like, at a fundamental level to me, I just see movement around the planet as like a human right. Like, for me, I used to like having an American passport where I could travel. It used to be the case, like I think that decency of like letting people move about to seek out their happiness seems like pretty basic to me. And so like there's that, but in terms of actual policy and how do you administer democracies, how do you administer social safety nets with people flowing in and out of these systems, there's big questions to think through there, but to me, that moral core of it has to be right. And the moral core to me is movement is a human right. I think of it that way. But I'll put a link here to the Migrant Justice Platform, and they've definitely like articulated the stuff in policy language and talking about like a moratorium on deportations, like the way Trump said, we'll shut down immigration until we figure out what the hell's going on. We can say, let's shut down deportations until we figure out what the hell's going on. So, starting with some simple things like that.
Cristina, do you have a
yeah, I was just thinking. I definitely take Alex's lead in the political strategy of what a policy could look like. But I also see like the abolishment of ICE is definitely like something that I see as something that would be humane, and just the act of including or maybe even having undocumented people lead in these conversations would be really effective, and I think it would produce a lot of wonderful solutions, better than we can come up with, that they have the most experience. So it just feels funny for me to come up with the ideas when we have such wonderful, talented, smart people who can tell us what they're thinking.
Well,
I really recommend. I've been listening to the Homeland Insecurity podcast. And that's a podcast hosted by a young undocumented immigrant, a woman named Erica Andiola, which tells the history of DHS, basically, the Department of Homeland Security. Super informative and enlightening, and thinking about how much money has gone in, like I just was looking at it earlier today, $50 billion a year for a system that's basically out, like, it was started after 9/11, but is not really anymore. It's no longer really targeted at violence or terrorism. It's an immigration control system, $50 billion a year. So almost $1 billion a week. Like, if instead that went to job training for people that were arriving, if it went to care, I mean, just the amount of resource, so I think this moment of Black Lives Matter and thinking about, abolish these systems or shut them down or diminish them, but then use those resources that the money that's already being spent to do things to make life better. It's like, it's incredibly possible. You see in this system that's been built up, this incredible human capacity to build and organize and do all this stuff, but it's been used to build violence, to build punishment, to build pain. So what if those resources were used to build other things, education, decency, etc.? So that's my pitch. I'll take it. But listen, the podcast is very good.
I want to give you the small thank you for joining us tonight, and the medium thank you for making this brilliant, beautiful, deeply meaningful film, and then the giant thank you for all of your work over the years. Alex, our friendship has touched me in deep, deep ways over the years. And I'm just so glad you guys are out there doing what you're doing, sharing all of this in story form. It's just made us a better people, all the work you do. So deep appreciation.
It's wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's a dance, man, because we need people to show it and take the time to organize it and think about it. And so grateful for your friendship, and grateful for anybody who's out there on a Friday night listening to this, and hope we can gather in person and have some overdue hugs soon.
Yes, and you can tell us more about the Tierra Amarilla story. We've got to get that made after COVID. We're ready for that here in New Mexico. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you guys for taking the time, and we will see all of you and more on Tuesday night back at the living room. That's right, Tiarina is going to be the subject of Alex's next films. Oh, look.
Good books.
There you go. Right here in New Mexico. He's been scouting. So we'll see you guys here in New Mexico after things calm down, and we'll see everybody else back in the CCA living room soon. Thank you.
Okay.